Shalom and welcome to Life Lessons. We are in the fourth book, the book of Numbers. In Hebrew is Chumash Bamidbar. In Parshat Naso, the second section, known as Naso. The literal translation of Naso means lift up. So we'll start with a little story that they say that in the shtetl, this is in the olden days when Jews lived in the villages, they lived together, and they had the rules how to run the affairs of the little old ghetto style. In Yiddish we call it the shtetl. So also we know that there is the Holy Society. The Holy Society is the Chevra Kadisha. These are the people that take care of an individual after he passes on. Because as you know, there is the Jewish rituals where the body gets washed and then dressed properly with the shrouds and has to be buried in the coffin and all the details that come with it. So all that is dealt from the minute the person passes away till burial by a group of volunteers known as Chevra Kadisha. The translation in English is the Holy Society. And in different places, they sometimes have different rules. They are also many times in charge how the gravestone should be and what you could write, what you shouldn't write. There's rules. As here in America, different cemeteries belong to different associations, different groups, different synagogues, houses of worship, and according to this, that's how the rules are. So in this particular place, they had a rule, and the rule was that one of the conditions how to bury an individual if somebody could get up and give a eulogy. And usually, what does it mean to give a eulogy? Eulogy means to say that you have something positive to say about the deceased. What they meant to say that if you can't give a eulogy for that individual that passed away, then he will have to find another place where to be buried, not in that cemetery, where in those days specifically that could be very hard. Where exactly you're going to do it? So the story goes here, there was an individual that passed away, and they looked around and there's nobody there that could get up and say a eulogy. So they had a meeting, and there was one wise person that gets up and says, well, I found something. I have what to say. So I said, what do you have what to say? He says, well, this deceased that passed away, you should all know that his brother is worse than him. Okay, so now we had a eulogy, so they were able to bury him. A few years had gone by, and guess what? The brother passed away. So they look around. Anyone has anything to say? No, nobody has anything to say. They call a meeting. What are we going to do? So the same wise guy gets up and says, I have what to say. And he said to everyone, thanks to him, we were able to bury his brother. So, that was positive enough, and they were able to bury him. So the question that becomes in front of us is when we talk about identity. Who are we? Are we not somebody else? Or there is something to us? We get lost many times in describing things what they are not. But when we want to define something in the positive, who are we? Maybe sometimes we have a hard time to do it. There's quite a few examples, and without getting lost in a political examples, but we know very well out there about what's going on many times, not just in the current situation, is that so many people do not vote because they're excited about a certain individual. They vote because they don't like the other guy, she or him. And because many times it's very hard to define what really the person is. And many times there's disappointments later on. What we thought that this individual will bring us salvation and hope and all that, after they get comfortable in their office, we know that things are not always as they have promised. But we see that very clear, that many times when we go in the booth to vote, many times is, oh, her or him, I don't like. There's nothing to talk about. I'm not voting for that person. And by process of elimination, you come to who you're going to vote for. So really, what you went with what you don't. It's not automatically you said, "Ooh, I like this guy. Ooh, I like what he has to say." You went with the process of elimination. Another interesting example will be when it comes to education. We know very well that parents, and I would say teacher, but let's talk more about parents, have to set certain rules. And there's no question, as the children grow up, especially when they're younger, a lot of times it will seem to the child that there's too much don't. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. Okay? But what they really are meant is to define what it should be done. So there's no question, if we think from a point of view of education, for the success of education, there has to be some boundaries and there has to be some limitations. But in that process, we also know very well, but if parents will emphasize all the time the negative, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that, we know it's not going to take long that the kids are going to rebel, because they're missing that warmth and that positive atmosphere. It cannot be don't. We all know that very well. So the same thing is when it comes in Judaism, when we want to keep Torah mitzvahs and follow what God wants from us, it's the same idea. There's a whole list of things. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. But then there's a whole bunch of things of positive. This is what you should do. You should pray, you should eat kosher, and all these things that have to do, help others, all the positive things that there is. But the question many times is how we define it and how do we do it. And sometimes we get lost in the don't, and before we have a chance to figure out what and when, we already getting upset with the don't, and we want to leave and not be involved. There is, everyone knows, is a famous writer. He's a Holocaust survivor, Elie Wiesel. He wrote many books, and he has a very interesting book that talks about, it's a novel, and he talks about a religious father during the communist time that has a communist son, and the dialogue that goes on between the religious father and the communist son. And the communist son, obviously, he's, I shouldn't use the word brainwashed, but some sort of very, what he was fed by the party, with all the demagoguery from the party, that we are about helping others, doing good and kindness for others. So the father is trying to tell the son, he says to him, remember that you are a Jew. And because you're a Jew, you should remember that the reason why you're going to be doing good things and helping others is because of what you are and what you believe and what the Bible, what the Torah tells you. Okay? And then he tells them something very important. And he says to them as follows, that you should know the day that you will care for others to the detriment of your brothers, then by the end you will deny everything. If you think that, you know what the party teaches me, but that will come on the expense of what the belief is and what the Torah tells you, by the end is going to be, you're going to be really hurting everyone, not just your own fellow. And basically the whole book talks about that this is the dilemma for the rest of the life, where this boy that grew up later as a communist and remembering what his father told him, and back and forth and back and forth. Because sometimes in our mind we think and when we talk about Judaism, I'm sure this exists in other religion, there may be certain of the things that my religion believes is in conflict in what I think is good and kindness and what I should be doing in helping others, and seems like that my religion believes in some restrictions. So we have to know that if you go that way, by the end, you're not just going to be rude to your own people, you're going to be rude to everyone, and you're going to be denying everything. And what is it? Because we fail to define the positive, and we get lost in the negative. So therefore, the positive is very important. However, as we say on the other hand, we have to have boundaries. We have to have limitations. So in the book of Psalms, that we say it in our prayers and in the Shabbos prayers, this is in Psalm 33, there's a verse there that says, Su meira v'asei tov. Stay away from evil and do positive. The order of the verse is Su meira, stay away from evil. So you have to know first what is evil and to stay away from it. And then you need to concentrate on the positive. It will be almost, if we could use a little bit of an example, somebody that moves into a neighborhood. And we know some neighbors are wonderful and everything is, all the neighbors are wonderful. But sometimes there's neighborhoods that people that live there know that there's certain neighbors that you need to stay away from. Those are not the people you should run to be friends with them right away. So people will tell you, oh, this neighbor, great. That one, maybe. So a lot of times people define things, but sometimes it's important if you want to know, especially when it comes to parents and children, and you send kids, especially those that send their kids to public school, are very worried about sometimes what kind of atmosphere, what kind of friendship. And parents, as the kids are younger, it's very important that they should help their kids in a very smart way to form relationships that will last and will have a positive effect. So maybe when kids are younger, sometimes the parents will say, you know, these and these kids, as of now, you need to stay away from them. Maybe later on, but as of now, you need to stay away from them. In other words, we would love to believe that we live in messianic times where everything is wonderful. And then you could say hello to everyone out there, and you could befriend everyone out there. We know that it's not so. And we know very well how parents that are very worried about their children always tell the children, do not speak to strangers. Stay away from strangers. And we know that as a reality. When kids did speak to strangers, unfortunately, there were sometimes terrible consequences. So the idea of the negative here is for the positive. It's not for the sake of the negative. It's for the health of the child, for the health of the family. The same thing is when this psalm says, stay away from evil and do good. The staying away from evil is to define the person to help them that they should be able to do good. So in Kabbalah and in Hasidus, in Hasidic thoughts, they bring a very interesting example about to try to understand what is the stay away from evil and the doing positive. So the explain is when you're moving into a new house, let's say, and you're about to move in the furniture and everything there. So it's very clear and it's understood that the first thing that you need to do before you move everything in, that the floors need to be clean. So you have to come, clean up, get rid of all the dust and of all the dirt, and then you could bring in the furniture. If you don't do that, it's going to be much harder. If, let's say, you move everything in and the place is still upside down and dirty and disgusting or whatever, it's going to be much, much harder. You don't bring in furniture, and of course not new furniture, if the place is dirty. So step number one is you need to take a broom and get rid of the dust and of all the dirt. That is called getting rid of evil in Kabbalah. before you bring in the furniture, that this symbolizes the positive, the house is going to shine, the good stuff, where in Jewish thought, that will be the action, the doing good things. This is what defines you. All of a sudden, there's a look to the place, but the first thing you have to do, get rid of the dirt. And that's a very important point. And obviously, you have to define what dirt is. So when you define what dirt is, you get rid of the dirt, and then you can concentrate on the positive. Having this introduction, we'll get into our section over here that we'll understand. The verse begins in this parasha, in this section. God spoke to Moses, and he told him, Naso edrosh bnei Gershon. Lift up the head of the children of Gershon. What it means is to take a census, count their heads. But it says in the language here, lift their head. What are we talking about? We're talking now about the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi, they were in charge of when they were traveling to transport all the items of the sanctuary, of the tabernacle, into wagons. The ark was on the shoulders, and the jobs were divided between the 3 children of Levite and their families. So Levite had 3 children. The oldest was Gershon, the second one was Kihat, and the third one was Merari. The end of last week's section spoke about Kihat, and he carried the holy objects. And this week it talks about the children of Gershon, and then the children of Merari. And each one exactly, there's a counting how many they were and what they were supposed to be doing. But the verse over here says, count them too. Count Gershon too. Now, interesting enough, they're not in order of how they were born. Gershon is the oldest. Kehat is the second one. So first, in the previous section, Kehat is mentioned, that he's the second one. And here, Gershon is mentioned. Why in this order? So we have to understand what the meaning of the words are, because names of people in the Torah and the Bible also have a meaning and a lesson that we could take out from it. Gershon means divorce and driving out. It's from the word of Hebrew, gerushin. When you have a bill of divorce, that severs a relationship. To say it in a positive way is driving out. Now, negatively speaking means, especially when it comes to a divorce, that this is not always positive. The only positive that could be that hopefully that the people that got divorced should be able to find a good match and things should work out a little bit better. But the idea of driving out or divorcing has a deeper meaning that it is leading to positive. What is it? That when we have negative feelings inside us, negative force inside us, so before we concentrate on the positive, we need to drive out these negative forces from inside us. If a person is full of negative, it's very hard to be positive. If you want to be a person that smiles to each person, likes each person, you need to get rid of some negative that exists inside us and not to be always critical about everything and to have a positive attitude. We know for ourselves very well that some people that have a negative attitude, ask them how many friends do they have. Many of the times, except family, people stay away from these kinds of people. Say, I can't talk to this guy. Every other line is criticizing or has something to say. A person that is smiling, a person that always has a positive thing to say, it's a whole different story. That is the word Gershon. Gershon means to drive out. And what we're talking about is to drive out the negative. in correspondence to what we saw before from the Psalms, and this whole idea we're talking before is get rid of the dirt. Okay? When we come to the second name, kihat, that's the idea in Hebrew of gathering. You're bringing things together. That is the positive. You want to get to the gathering, bringing in the furniture, first you have to drive out. But the goal over here is not to drive out. A person could go on a whole life and say, I'm getting rid of the negative, but you never got to the second step. That's not what it's all about. That's only step number one. The goal is to gather. The goal is to bring things together and to do the positive. That is the difference here between the previous section and this current section. The previous section was telling you what the goal is. This is the children of Kihat. They were carrying the sanctuary. The sanctuary is the tablets, the commandments, because that is the goal. That is the positive. As we know, in the commandments of God that God gave us, there is positive and there is negative. There is the commandments, as I mentioned before, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. The idea of that is to define the situation, but not to get stuck with it. It's not that I get up in the morning and I say, oh my God, today don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. That's not how we look on things is. The idea is, what am I here to do for God in this world to make this world a better world? How do I help God that this world should be a better world? So I'm going to concentrate on the positive. But in order to concentrate on the positive, I have to figure it out. What are the boundaries? What are the limitations? But not to get stuck in it. That is to help us to get to the second step. So therefore, the first one born is Gershon, drive out, because that's the beginning. But the goal is number two, is how I'm going to be positive and how I'm going to be able to build and do things. They say a very interesting story of a great righteous person, a Hasidic Rabbi. In the Jewish world, what we have is Hasidic rabbis where their disciples will come visit them, and especially on Friday night is known as the Tish. The Tish is the Shabbos table, the Sabbath table, where they come, they sit together with the Rebbe. The Rebbe is considered as the head rabbi, the head master. And they listen to him, they have what he has to say, and usually they give food. Anyone that's familiar, most Jewish occasions always come with food. So in that kind of a situation, also there's food. So it says, the story goes that there was this Hasidic master, his name was Rabbi Chaim Tzanzor, and was a disciple sitting there by the table, and he was so involved, and he got, as we would say, so spiritual, that when the food came by, he kind of ignored the food. He didn't take for himself to his plate. He was, as we would say, there's a phrase sometimes they say he was catching angels. He was very spiritual. But the head rabbi, Rabbi Chaim, noticed it. So he turns to him, he says, Mr. So-and-so, you forgot to take food on your plate. He says, Rebbe, I'm not interested in food. I just want the spiritual stuff. I don't care about the food. So the Rebbe looked on him and he says, look, the soul that comes down from heaven inside each one of us is very, very spiritual. It is into a body. If you don't feed the body, then you know what? The soul is going to depart. So you may, all these things, I'm catching angels, I'm getting very spiritual. You have to connect it. You have to connect it into actuality in doing, feeding your body in a positive way, obviously, but it goes together. So the same thing will be, if somebody is saying, well, I can't take it, how this world is lacking meaning and how terrible it is, and therefore the person will be just preaching negative, this is no good and this is no good. Fine and good, but you're missing the point, because you must say and bring in what positive needs to be done. So therefore, what good things needs to be done? How do I repair my relationship with God? How do I help that this world becomes good, and not just yell and scream what's no good? So we go back to the beginning. What some people will say, it's an identity crisis. Exactly how we define things, who we are, or should I just get up by a funeral to describe that his brother was worse, or thanks to him we're able to bury his brother. This is all negative. We want to concentrate on the positive. And what's interesting about these sections of the Torah, that always they are read around a certain time of the year. There is these sections that we've been going over in our life lesson cycle. This is around Shavuot, the holiday of Shavuot, the time when the 10 Commandments were given, the time of the revelation of God on Mount Sinai. In Kabbalah, they describe that as a marriage. God is the groom and us are the bride, and that's the connection that exists. And there's a certain relationship. The same as in a marriage. It cannot be just don't. It's not going to work. There has to be boundaries and limitations, but with that comes the action and the positive and the good things. And that's how these things get defined. The same thing is in the relationship with God, with us. And that's why this is discussed now about these things, about carrying the tabernacle and all these details, and especially those names to tell us, step number 1, we have to have boundaries and limitations. Step number 2 is to do the positive and to be able to give to our children a sense of pride. And with that, it should be very helpful for us in making this world a better world and for the rest of the world. Thank you.